Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last tutorial, so I thought I'd come back and give another tutorial based on an old tutorial. If you're familiar with my tutorial videos, you'll know that I did a rock pile tutorial roughly 2 years ago using a process called particle instancing. Where I just scattered some rocks on a surface to create a convincing rock pile. It's not 100% wasn't 100% convincing, but it was getting there. I've recently learned a new technique thanks to Maya 2016 extension 2 because there's this new tool in this version of Maya, and it's called Mash. And so it does a similar thing. It's able to instance objects on another surface, but it does a really good job of it. So here I've got the rocks instanced, and I've also got this grass instanced. These are just assets which I produced in a different scene, brought them in, and then created this environment pretty quickly using this technique. I'll also have these rock assets available, and this scene with the lighting and everything. I'm not going to be supplying the grass, but yeah, all this stuff will be on my Gumroad. So if you want some cool rock assets and also a breakdown, you'll be able to go into the scene and look through how I did everything, and yeah, you can look at my lighting. Yeah, I'm gonna provide everything. So yeah, that'll be available to you as well. So let's get started. So for starters, I've got these 5 rocks. I just quickly sculpted these in ZBrush and then used ZRemesher to generate the mesh. So I created these really quickly. I've got heaps of tutorials around which deal with my creation of rocks. So you can go check those out if you want to know how these were produced. So a big thing using Mash is the pivot point of your objects. So the pivot point determines how it's going to reproduce on the surface of your object. Let me just unhide this group. I've just got my outliner over here. I'll drag it out if whenever I need to explain something, but I'm just looking for this guy, and I'm going to hide these. So this is the base that we're going to be scattering on. So it's the same one which I used in my last rock scatter tutorial. I just went and grabbed it, brought it in. This was just generated in ZBrush with some really rapid sculpting, and I made sure to delete off the base polygons. Otherwise, I'd get rocks scattering on the base as well, and that's unnecessary. So it'd be unnecessary instances. So yeah, back to pivot points. So as you can see, my pivot point, I'll just hide this for a sec again. So yeah, I've got the pivot point in the center of the object. What this means is when it does scatter, it's going to scatter with the pivot point. So let me take it up here. It's going to scatter with the pivot point there. And so it looks like it's sticking halfway in, halfway out. But for the final result of this asset, this base is going to be hidden because I'm going to have so many rocks. I'm not going to need this base anymore. So this is just my personal choice. If you could also have the pivot point at the base. So you can have the pivot point at the base of the object, which means it'll scatter like this. But when we add random rotation, what's going to happen is sometimes the rock might look like this, but it'll be touching, so it'll look like this. And so maybe that'll create a cool result because you'll have some more internal than external, but I have a feeling that you may have to produce more a higher scatter count. So it's hard to I haven't really tested that out yet, but I just thought by having the pivot point in the center, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So yeah, having the pivot point in the center. Let me just undo this to go back. Having the pivot point in the center means that it'll be sitting about here, and so then when I put on the random rotation, it's just like this. It's just any way like this or like this. So yeah, I find that's a lot better. for what I'm trying to achieve anyway, but there's no hard and fast rules here. Okay, so let me just zero this guy out. Another thing to keep in mind is, see how I've kind of all these rocks have little transformations just so they're all sitting on top of the grid plane here, because I was doing some test renders of them. As long as you don't freeze these out, this is okay, because what will happen is if I freeze it out, now the mesh is going to think the pivot point is here, and so that's where it'll be attaching to the mesh, which will be an even bigger issue if it's this one and I freeze transforms that, and then the pivot point's here, and it's not going to scatter correctly on the surface. So let me undo that. So when I zero all these out, what should actually happen? Oh, whoops. So zero this one out, zero this one out. Let me just go, I'll select these three because they're the only ones not zeroed out. So I'll zero all them out, and all their pivot points should be right in the world zero. So yeah, just make sure when you're ready to scatter an asset, that's how you set it up, because you'll get the best results. Okay, so I got my 5 rocks. The 5 rocks are going to help with variation within my rock pile. So the first thing we want to do is we want to select these rocks, and we want to go create mesh network. Now I'm going to go to the settings to show you this. Hide original object. I don't like to do that because I may want to make some adjustments to my rocks in scale or something like that. And if they're hidden, then yeah, I can't make those changes. So I'd prefer to keep them visible. And then you can choose whether you want it to be an instance or a mesh. Now, I actually already had recorded this tutorial, and then I found out something which was quite important. So mesh allows you to actually switch pretty freely between these two modes. So it's not a big issue if you use mesh and then you're like, wow, this asset's getting really heavy. I really need to go. I should have done this as an instancer, and then you can switch it. But I'll show you how to do that later on. Instancer basically just makes the process more lightweight. It's just going to be taking copies of these rocks and assigning them, whereas mesh is more or less like duplicating the object and then scattering it on the surface. So I'm going to go with the lightweight option, but we're going to have to convert to the mesh option at some point, and I'll explain that later on. So let's go instancer and go apply and close. And so by default, what's happened here, if I bring over my outliner, here's the mesh node, and then or the attribute, and then we go to the attribute editor, and then it automatically assigns a linear distribute node. So you can switch this to a bunch of stuff, radial, which is pretty cool. So it's putting them in a circle. Spherical, so, and then you want to crank this up, it's going to be in a sphere. Yeah, so this is your count, so let's do, for the start, 100. You can see it's all the same rock, all facing the same way, so it's not exactly what we want, but I'm going to show you how to change this. So for the distribution type, we're going to want to use mesh. And now it says please connect a mesh. So if you go under the mesh settings, and you'll see there's an input mesh setting here. So I'm obviously going to want to use my base. So I'm going to unhide that. So there it is. And then I'm going to go to mesh, and then I can middle mouse click and drag this base onto here. And then it automatically just scatters all those guys on the surface. Now an important thing to note, which took me a little while to work out, is this scatter uses face area. When I select this geometry, you'll see the faces aren't really, they're not exactly similar in size and shape. So like, see, this polygon here is very different to, say, this polygon or even this polygon here. What mesh does, by default, I'm pretty sure what it's doing is it's it's gonna scatter more in areas where there's polygon density and less where there's less polygon density with the default settings. By ticking this, it's going to randomize it a lot more, so it's not going to take into consideration the polygon size. So let's say you're scattering an object across a character, you're going to get most of your density in the face and on the hands and feet, and the rest of the body is going to get not much at all. So if you're like scattering like little micro hairs or something like that, that's just something to keep in mind. And then calculate rotation is cool. So what that does is it's taking into account the normal of our base mesh, the direction of the normals on each face, and it's then assigning that rotation to each object. For rocks, that's not really useful because I don't want them all facing in the same direction. I want them to be random. But for example, if we were scattering trees right now, trees grow towards the sun, so I would want all my trees basically sticking up with some very slight random rotation on them. But in this case, I don't want that. I want them to be obeying the surface curvature of this mound. So yeah, that's basically it for the distribute node. I'm going to be coming back in here and adjusting my points as I go. I like to kind of keep it low in the beginning, and then once I've added all my nodes, I come back here and crank it up to make sure that I'm getting full coverage. So let's go back to Mash. The first important one is ID. So we'll go ID and add to ID. I want to make this random. Basically what this is doing is it's taking all our 5 rocks here and it's using all of them. So now you can see we don't have the repetition of just 1 rock. This is all 5 rocks just being duplicated again and again. So that's already helping with some good variation. Next we'll go back here and we'll go to random. Let's go random scale. Yeah, let's go scale. So I'm working in decimeters. If you're working in centimeters, then you won't have it explode like this. It's exploding like this because it's making it 10 units, negative 10 units in one direction and positive 10 units in the other direction. And for me, if you're working in decimeters, there's 10 decimeters in a meter. So this is basically scaling all my rocks by a meter, which is not what I want. If you're dealing in centimeters, you won't have them explode like this. But yeah, anyway. So I'm going to set this to 0 and 0 just to begin with. You also have settings here to scale them in XYZ and then in uniform random. So I'll explain that in a second. So I'm going to want some scale variation. Let's go negative 0.5 and 0.5. So now we've got some which are becoming smaller, some which are becoming bigger, which is exactly what we want. But we have a situation where some of these rocks are getting really stretched out, which, like, I believe, like, if you have a pile of rocks, a lot of them they're going to be quite similar. You do have rocks like this in nature. They're more sedimentary rocks than anything else. But yeah, I'm not really going for a variation in my rocks. I want them to be more similar. So more similar in rock type, I should say, because they're using very similar. They're all using like the same textures and stuff like that. So by clicking this, it makes sure that it scales them all uniformly. So for example, if I click on this shape and hit R, so if I make this bigger or smaller, that's a uniform scale. That's basically what this tool is doing. By the way, it should be important to note that yes, you can adjust your ground plane even after you've scattered. You can do anything to it. You can delete faces, you can move stuff around, move vertices, and it won't break your scatter, your mash scatter. Anyway, back to random scale. So and then this allows you to choose like, oh, I don't want them to get taller, so you can turn that off, or I don't want them scaling in the X, I only want them scaling in the Z. So you have a lot of selection here, a lot of variations that you can add, but I'm pretty happy with this for now. Let's go back to Mash and we'll go random rotation. So this time I don't want it to be uniform because I want them to be as random as possible, and I'm going to say negative 360. by positive 360. So they're basically just going to be rotating to any direction. If you don't want them, like we're getting some which are pointing straight up and stuff like that, but what you could do is limit it to only rotate a little bit. So let's say we only want it to rotate 45 degrees in the negative and 45 degrees in the positive. Now we still have some sticking up, and to fix that, I'm pretty sure if I go in here and I turn off calculate rotations, now they're all like, they're not going to rotate further than 45 degrees, and you don't have any which are vertically pointing up. That's because I'm not allowing them to go past the 45 degree rotation mark. But I'm not too bothered about that, so I'm just going to go back here and turn it. Oh, I don't want, wait, this is rotation. Yeah, and I'm going to make it back to 360 by 360. Negative by 360. Negative 360 by positive 360. So, okay, cool. We're getting a lot of random rotation. We're getting random scale in here. I'm pretty happy with how this is coming along. So let's go back to the distribute node. And let's increase the count, because I want to get some more coverage here. So let's take it up to 1,000. And because these are instances, it's not going to slow down my scene at all. Like you can see my face count is still 12,000, which is just the poly count of these rocks. So if I select these rocks, you can see that they're 12,000. Because all it's doing is it's just making little instance copies of those and just propagating them. So the speed of my scene it does not change. Anyway, if this was mesh, it'd be a lot heavier. There'd be a lot more polygons in the scene. So number of points 1,000. So this is probably too much. Let's go to 500. By selecting my base mesh, I can see where the holes are. Now the holes aren't a bad thing, because if you have a look at a pile of rocks with like some large rocks in it, you actually get some negative spaces where all the rocks are kind of sitting on each other, and they cause like a cavity, like a little hole. So I'm not too worried about a few holes. This is actually pretty good. I might actually increase it a little bit more though. So let's say 600. Yeah, and that looks pretty solid. Can't really see my base anymore. Well, yeah. So I got a couple of holes over here, but no big deal. But I want this rock pile to feel bigger. Like I want it to feel in scale. I want it to feel larger. And a good way to do that is to make everything smaller. So by making all the rocks smaller and then scattering more of them, yeah, like that's basically by having more smaller details and stuff in there. That's one way to help you achieve more scale. So at the moment, this to me looks like it could be, I don't know, 5 meters by 5 meters. Like if one of these rocks is like, I don't know, a foot long. But yeah, I want this to feel bigger. So if I go under, where do I want to go? So there's two ways I could do this. I could go to random scale and I could keep reducing this. But I kind of like my variation, the variation I have at the moment for negative 0.5 and 0.5. Wait, is that negative 0.5? Yeah, no, that's what I want. Negative 0.5 by positive 0.5, yeah. So then I can select the rocks and I can actually just scale them from here. So if I scale them down, and if I go into my channel box editor, I can really see this, and I'll go like 0.6. So now I'm like, oh, okay, now I have a lot more negative space on the top here, so I need to increase my scatter. So we'll go back to Mash, distribute, and let's make it 750. Still a lot of negative spaces. Let's go 1,000. Don't be afraid to like just ramp this up. There's still a lot of negative spaces, but I'm pretty happy with the scale of these rocks now. So let's go back to my rocks. So I've got them selected here, and I'm going to take them up to 0.7 in scale. Alright, so we still have a few holes here and there. Maybe I'll increase the scatter a bit more in distribution. Distribution, so let's go 1, 1, 0, 0. Alright, this is looking pretty solid now. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this should be good. Another thing to note is, like, say I'm like, oh, I really wish there was some rocks down here. I can go down to strength, and then you got random seed. And you can just like run this around, and then I'm like, oh, there we go, that filled out. Yeah, no, I think that looks better. Like there's a gap there, but that's fine. There's a couple of gaps here, that's fine. So now I'm confident in hiding that. And like, even though this might look weird, it's going to be dark in there. Not much light's going to be able to get in there, so it's still going to look okay. It's not going to look that bad. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with this scatter. By the way, that random seed, that's attached to most of these. So random seed is here for scale. It's here for random rotation. So yeah, if there's just something like, say this rock sticking out here, say I'm like, oh, I don't really like that being there, then I can go random rotation, and now it'll pop in, and it's gone. Yeah, so that's about it. So I'm gonna bring in my ground plane, and I'm gonna bring in my camera. Now I can look at it through camera. I should probably mention that I'm using Redshift to render. It's a GPU renderer, and it renders super fast. This is not sped up, this is just rendering right now. This is 1920 by 1080. It's just rendering in a matter of seconds. It's amazing. So if you want to look into Redshift, I highly recommend it, just for really fast renders. So yeah, that was 19 seconds to render this, and it's pretty good. And this is at default samples, so you can actually go higher to reduce like noise like this. But yeah. Anyways, yeah, so I'm pretty happy with how this rock pile's looking. I think something that it could really help is having like smaller little rocks which have kind of fallen off the primary mound and are just like lying on the ground around it, rather than it being this clean just like rock pile. So let me just close this, and I'm going to create another mesh network for you, which I think will be good in showing you the process again, but without me explaining it so much. So alright, so let me just create a cylinder. I should have had this prepared earlier, but I don't, so bear with me. So I'm just going to create a cylinder here. I'm going to delete these bottom faces, and then I'm going to center pivot and then go 0, 0, 0. Scale that out, and so I'm just going to be using this as a basis for where I want these smaller rocks to scatter. Make it a little bit bigger. Alright, so that's kind of, I don't want it quite in the center, I just want it like around, and then let's go through camera. And that looks pretty good. That's where generally they're going to be scattering, on that surface. So yeah, you just need to determine your surface. Also, other times you don't even need to determine your surface. You could just use the scatter, but just make sure it scatters on the grid. So yeah. Anyway, let me just hide this base for now, and I'll select my rocks again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's create a new mesh network. So create mesh network using the same settings as I had before. Over here you can see it's scattering them linearly like it does by default. So I go distribute, switch this to mesh, increase this to, let's say, 50 to begin with, and then we'll go to mesh input. That cylinder I just created, I'm going to drop in here. So now it's scattering them. I'll go to mesh, I'll go to ID, add to ID, set this to random. They're all going in the same direction. Actually, because of the polygon issue here, I'm going to tick this on so it's more random, because I'm pretty sure they would have been bunching in the center. Yeah, not necessarily, but anyway, just to be safe. That looks like a more random generation. Back to mesh, go random scale. Let's go -0.9, and let's go -0.5. because I want these ones to be small. I want this to be uniform scale. Because I can't imagine like one of the big rocks toppling off and rolling over here. If it did, it'd probably just stop here. But smaller ones, I could see like just being scattered around the base. So yeah, it's my thinking on that. Let's try negative 0.75 and negative 0.25. That's probably a bit better in scale range. Alright, go back to mesh, go random rotation. So the rotation, negative... for this one I'll go negative 45 by 45. Because I don't want any of them sitting up on their ends and pointing up to the sky, because, I don't know, it just wouldn't be as realistic, I don't think. Another node which I didn't touch on, you've got transform here, so I'm going to add a transform, and just because I want to increase their position to like, I'm going to push them up a bit, but I don't want them to be floating like this one, so let's go 0.25, 0.2, and where's the smallest rock? I don't want them to be floating, he's not floating. Some of them might look a bit weird like this, but then I can go into my random rotation and I can run the random seed. That looks a bit better. Not for this one though. Alright, I think I'm just gonna leave, I'm gonna remove this transform. So if you create a node and then you realize, oh, I didn't really want to do this, you can go delete this node. Yes. And then it's gone. So you can keep your node network quite clean. I'm going to look through camera. Now we got a few scattering, but I'd like a few more. Like all we can see from camera is a little bit of this one, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can't really see that many. So over here I'm just clicking on my Mash 2 to bring up my network, and then I'm going to go to distribute, and I'm going to double this. So let's make it 100. Now we can see a lot more rocks. The scale now, to me, looks a bit off, so now I'll go back to scale, and I'm going to take this back down to negative 0.9 and negative 0.5. So now they've all gotten considerably smaller, and this is what I had originally, and this is what I'm going to keep it at now. I can hide this base, and I can bring back the surface I had previously, and we can do another render. So here's our previous render. And I'm going to render from camera 1. Okay. Yeah, I think this helps. I don't really like these ones here, all in a row. That doesn't look very natural to me, even though this is completely random. So what I'll end up doing is I'll minimize this, and I'll go back to random distribute, and I'll run through my random seed, and then I'm like, okay. That one looks pretty good. Yeah, let's stick with that. Then I can open my render view back up, and we'll just render this area. Yeah, so that's about it. Actually, no, that's not about it. I just forgot one important thing that I was began explaining in the beginning. So what I found the first time I did this, it's kind of hard to tell from this distance, but my rocks, they're getting their displacement. I've got displacement on these guys, but they're not getting their subdivision. And if they have their subdivision, the displacement would be even more apparent than it is now. At the moment, because there is no subdivision, the displacement's just being assigned as a bump map. So that's just the way the rendering engine works. That's the way a number of rendering engines work. So yeah, I had to work out a way around this and a way to fix this. So now that I'm happy with this primary rock pile, what I can do is I can, in here, go to the instancer. Actually, no, you want to go to the Mash attribute. And I know this is the Mash 1 attribute because it's Mash 1 instancer, and that's the pile of rocks. So I can click that, and if I want to be able to, at the moment, if I go to my attribute editor for my instancer, there is nowhere that I can set subdivision levels, which is something you need to do if you're generating displacement. Either that or you have very heavy mesh in your scene. But anyway, so we go to Mash 1, and then we need to go up to Modify, create, mesh, utilities, and we want to go switch mesh geometry type. So what that's going to do is, remember right at the beginning how we had the choice of instancer and mesh? This is going to really quickly convert that pile into mesh. And so now you can see our poly count is really kicked up. So we're running with 1,300,000 rock faces just on these rocks alone. So that's pretty heavy. My scene can still run pretty seamlessly, even though that's a lot of polygons. So I look back through camera 1, and I can... And now that it's been converted, and the cool thing is, I can, at will, I can now, like by selecting this, if I want to now switch back to instancer, if I was like, oh wow, this is way too heavy, you can do that by just doing the same process I just showed you. So now by selecting the repro mesh, I now have the ability in my attribute editor, the Redshift ability to add tessellation, which is the same as subdivision. So I'll enable that and set my max subdiv to 4 because I've tested this and I know 4 is all I need. And I'll also enable displacement. And then it's going to enable auto bump mapping, which was... So I think it was able to hold on to its displacement, which is why we were getting the bump in the last render. But I want to be able to enable tessellation or subdivision. So now with that setting changed, I'm going to come back into my render view and I'm going to re-render. Okay, so now you can see from this render, like this is kind of far away, but if we had any close-up shots of this rock pile, like closer than this, then this would be more significant. But you can see here, as I flick between them, I am getting some more detail and variation to the rocks. Like for example, if we zoom in here, see the edge of this rock here? Before it was like a lot more flat and now it's got more detail to it. Same with like along here, before it was flat and now it's got that little notch taken out of it which the light is catching. So yeah, it does help, but in this case it may not have been 100% necessary, and if it's more important to me to keep this as instances than it is to use the displacement, then yeah, you just got to make that call with the asset. So yeah, that's about it. This is one that I prepared earlier, the one that I showed at the beginning. This is using the exact same technique, but I added in my grass asset as well, just to make it kind of sit in a world rather than just on a flat plane. So yeah, as I said in the beginning, like these rocks with their textures and this lighting scene and all that will all be available on my Gumroad. If you want some cool like rock assets, these rocks are actually, even though you can't see it here, I made sure that they're like really high res so that they can be used on all sorts of different scales. So this is just an example of the level of detail on the rocks. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with these assets I generated, and they're for my own personal library, but I just thought I'd share them with this tutorial. So yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you got something out of this. And yeah, it's a lot more simple than the particle distribution in my old tutorial. Like, you don't have to put in any expressions or anything like that. So thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something and got something out of this, and good luck creating your own assets in the future.